A video game with wasted potential annoys me more than a completely terrible one because you can see the improvements that could have been made and what a difference they'd make. You know, maybe they're artistic decisions, but they're wrong and you should feel bad. Oh man, imagine doing only half the job to any kind of competence. It's like you're really good at carving up a turkey, but oh no, I forgot to cook it. Looks like everyone has salmonella now. What a mistake to make. I think to why a boss fight might be underwhelming or disappointing, and maybe when they appear out of nowhere and have no significance to anything that came before, but also when they do carry significance but are still terrible. Significantly terrible. It's like a harsh dose of reality that reminds you that good villains don't automatically make good boss fights. But that's what makes it so frustrating, because a game has already done the hard part of making an antagonist who is good at their job, but then it falls just short. It's hard to say if writing the villain in the first place or giving them a good boss fight is more difficult, but can't they just get along sometimes? Good villains have every right to make good boss fights. We're so close to nice things. Don't ruin the nice things. Quite often the culmination of a villain's involvement in a video game is let down by it being too easy. As if they gave a conventional enemy a bit more health and some stronger attacks and thought, yeah, that'll do. What ends up happening is that the game spends so long building up to a fight that you know is coming at some point, and you finally get there and, oh, that was short. Don't worry, we'll see some of them later, but I'd like to start with a boss fight that went too far the other way. Game balance is important. Don't get too carried away. Lots of games can get by with only having one villain in them, but you get more character interactions if there's more than one bad guy to worry about. The game starts raising questions like if there's a hierarchy to these villains, or if one is going to betray the other. Also, apparently you get difficulty spikes. Really spiky ones. Devil May Cry, a series known for its flashy protagonist and generally boring antagonists. Maybe if you're playing for someone like Dante, you've got your work cut out for you, but Devil May Cry 3 is the peak for more than one reason. They actually wrote in some decent villains this time, and one of them is Dante's twin brother, so we can do loads of that. The other guy is some bald guy called Arkham, which might sound kinda dreary, but his alter ego is this weird clown, so yes, I want some of that. Arkham goes on to betray Virgil in a move that surprised no one, which means you gotta take him down with Dante and Virgil working together. Oh yeah, he's really unfair. No, Arkham is hard in a game that already has a steep learning curve. He'll keep throwing these tendrils out at you that are really hard to dodge, and even if you get into a rhythm, halfway into the fight he gets way stronger, and whatever style you have is taken away and replaced by Virgil, who kind of fights alongside you. It's a terrible boss that's interrupted and bookended by awesome cutscenes, but even Dante and Virgil teaming up can't save it. Also, bear in mind that the original release of Devil May Cry 3 has the messed up difficulty settings, where normal in the West was actually Japanese hard mode. It is a miracle anyone actually finished this game. I don't like talking about the same things every week on this show. I own a lot of video games and I've played some of them, so I like to think that I have a large enough portfolio to work from and to not mention the same 3 or 4 games for every video I make. And I like to think that I stick by that. I ask you, dear viewer, when was the last time I mentioned Metal Gear in one of these videos? At least a few months ago, so I might be on the mend. But I don't think I could cover boss fights that don't do their villains justice without taking a trip back to Arkham Asylum. I think it says a lot when the final boss with Titan Joker at the end of Batman Arkham Asylum is the only time in the series where you have a genuine head-to-head confrontation with the Joker. Almost as if Rocksteady looked back on this fight with shame and never attempted something like it again. Really, if someone had the idea to pump the Joker full of some magical serum so he could match up to Batman's physical strength, ruining virtually all of the Joker's appeal, I probably wouldn't let them have any say in any game we made after that. It's especially jarring because Rocksteady had done such a good job with the Joker up until this point. Like, he's maniacal and threatening and everything he needs to be to cause Batman problems. You don't need to make him buff. Although, every time I bring this fight up, I'm reminded that this took inspiration from a similar occurrence in the comics, but not all ideas from the comics are good ideas. Batman also kills people in the comics, and you probably shouldn't reuse that. Oh, come the fuck off! You get the sense that you can't really have a final boss fight with the Joker, not only because no other game in the series tried it afterwards, but also because you can't really have a standard boss fight with the Joker. If you think about Arkham City and Mr. Freeze, that fight was more like solving a puzzle. You wonder if you could do something like that with the Joker. You just gotta think about it a bit more. Maybe make Batman scrawny. That'd be really funny. One of the best ways to give your quests some meaning is to have the villain be a constant threat throughout the game. If your final boss isn't someone who you've been perceiving as a danger for the hours you spent getting to this point, the adventure loses a lot of momentum. You get to the end and it's like, oh, yeah, I guess I'll kill this guy too. It's interesting that Zelda games kind of do both of these at the same time. You're constantly reminded who the bad guy is as he does all these bad things, but very often the fight you need to win to reach the credits isn't against that villain. Interestingly, Breath of the Wild saw a shift towards more of a passive antagonist as you run around blowing things up and trying to ignore the ominous cloud around Hyrule Castle. Ganon in this game isn't quite as engaging as in, say, The Wind Waker, but everywhere you go he's lurking just out of shot as a reminder of your ultimate goal. It doesn't help that Blood Moons make him stronger and let him revive every dead enemy in the world. That's kind of a dick move. Since I was playing it on this channel, it took me 5 months to get around to fighting Ganon, and in that time, I heard that a lot of people didn't like how he was handled at the end. Honestly, I thought it was alright. You don't get to fight against a guy because you interrupt him while he's regenerating, so you end up fighting this monstrosity, but it kind of works. Nothing too special, but it does its job fairly well. My issue, and I think most people's issues, are with the second form, where Ganon bloats up to become the giant pig we all know and love, and subsequently loses all menace he might have had before. I never thought I'd be fighting Ganon in any form and feel like the bad guy here. Ganon's enraged form kinda just waddles around while you pepper it with light arrows. You're given a horse for extra maneuverability, but Dark Beast Ganon hasn't got anything in his arsenal that might require a quick bit of dodging from you. You think how this setup was handled in Twilight Princess, and yeah. Breath of the Wild is more kinda like Shadow of the Colossus without the climbing, but more no. The embodiment of Ganon's hatred is shockingly easy. You probably don't even need the light arrows. He's just a little angry. Just give him a bit of time to get it out of his system and he'll be fine. It's nothing to worry about, people. Just go back to your chickens. A good narrative can do most of the antagonist's job for them. Certainly, if you cut corners, a crappy story makes it very hard for a villain to leave any kind of impression on the player. Maybe you should weave a story with plenty of plot twists and revelations. Then the good things will happen. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who thought after playing most of BioShock that the star of the show up until that point was your surroundings, the city of Rapture. Not to undermine any of the game's other qualities, but BioShock is absolutely dripping in atmosphere and the constant niggling feeling that something is amiss. I mean, you're having to fend off splicers and other colourful psychopaths with a wrench, so any illusion of Rapture being an idyllic society crafted by the gods didn't last much longer than the ride in the lift at the start. There's lots of creatively creepy people in this game to keep you on your toes, but obviously the most memorable interaction comes when head honcho Andrew Ryan reveals that hypnotic suggestions by your friend Atlas has driven most of your actions to this point. A man chooses, a slave obeys, all that shit. He takes a golf club to the face though, so he can't be that smart. But Atlas isn't the smooth-talking Irishman that was promised. Or rather he is, but this guy isn't Atlas, but actually a New Yorker called Frank Fontaine. And shit, man, it's kinda hard to keep a track of what's going on after you've just been told how you were never in control of your actions. An interesting deconstruction of how a protagonist is at the mercy of the player. But Fontaine is gonna take a lot of wrench to the face right now. Unfortunately, despite putting a lot of thought into how Fontaine would function as a villain, not even half of that was carried over into the boss fight. He's some kind of crazy buff superhero guy who shoots fire, but you've also got plenty of superpowers yourself, and a large selection of firearms to shoot him with, and it's about as involving as it sounds. You shoot him a bunch, he shouts at you angrily, sometimes you stick needles in him and, just kind of goes through the motions. This is an easy fight as well. Fontaine doesn't hit too hard and his attacks follow a predictable pattern. And any part of this boss being predictable runs counter to the mindfuck you experienced not so long ago. Nah, it's actually really creative because the game is experiencing a form of cognitive dissonance. Or they just didn't know how to make an end boss. Might be that second one. Sometimes I worry that a game is putting more effort towards crafting an exciting villain to cover up the fact that they don't give that same villain a good boss fight later down the line. I mean, great antagonists have resulted in awesome fights in the past, but it absolutely isn't an automatic process. Having good writers doesn't necessarily translate into adequate scenario writers or programmers, and often giving a brilliant villain the boss fight they deserve isn't as likely as you would think. All I'm gonna say is Vaas was a fucking incredible bad guy. So I've heard that a lot of people can't relate to Jason Brody in Far Cry 3 as he goes from God's gift to mankind to a seasoned warrior who murders thousands to get what he wants, all while remaining a boring character to listen to. And I can get behind that, if just because every time you take Vaas out of a scene, it loses like 90% of its value. Vaas Montenegro is the perfect antagonist for this kind of game. An unpredictable pirate guy who dominates every scene he's in while also acting as a surprising reflection of what Jason Brody might end up like. Maybe if Jason obsesses so much over getting stronger, he might lose his grip on reality and become this sadistic, remorseless pirate who ties people to cinder blocks. It's setting up this real struggle between the two characters that I'm sure can be worked really well into a boss fight between the two. Oh, that's not gonna happen, is it? I mean, it's a modern first-person shooter, so the odds of Vaas going out with a bang were always quite low, but I would have liked it if there'd been some kind of legitimate interaction between the two of you before he died. Vaas stabs you with a knife, but hey wait, you're not actually dead because Jason Brody is made of drugs or something, so instead you get a trippy sequence that hammers home the connection between Jason and Vaas in a very clumsy way. But hey, it's fine because the actual Vaas is at the end, and he dies in a cutscene. Vaas is stabbed repeatedly in the chest and goes out like a bitch, and you had no input whatsoever. At least with Hoyt later on, who the game decides is the main protagonist now for whatever reason, you get a proper knife fight with button inputs and, some actual involvement. I mean, this fight is terrible too, but at least it tried to do something. You can't have a villain as dominant and as entertaining as Vaas and kill him off so effortlessly. I feel like the bad guy, and I'm not sure I'm supposed to yet. This is RabbidLuigi, and I've heard an interesting theory that the events of Far Cry 3 are actually a retelling of Alice in Wonderland. Jason Brody falls from the sky and goes on some crazy, wacky dream adventure full of drugs and murder, and I guess that kind of explains some of the supernatural elements like Vaas dying in a dream sequence, but that is a terrible justification for everything that goes on. Surely I should feel as satisfied killing Vaas as Jason is when he kills Vaas. But nah, it's fine, don't worry about it. You go off and kill 100 more people and you'll soon forget about it. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn into a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.